Rav Shraga Feivel Mendlowitz was perfectly well aware of who its founders and leaders were. Why is it being built by people who are not religious? So that they would maintain their connection with the Jewish people and not be swallowed up among the nations of the world.
The Call of Moshiach podcast with Ari Goldwag.
You're listening to the 7th edition of the Call of Moshiach podcast. I'd like to remind you once again this week about the Sefer, new Sefer, The Gift of Eretz Yisrael by Rav Yishai Kalfa. And he's told me that it's been released in the States. You can find it in your local Svarim store. Highly encourage you to get a copy of this. We're going to read a little story from this towards the end of the podcast. But let's read one last section from the introduction of the Sefer Erem Abanim Samecha. And he tells us like this, because, one of the challenges and difficulties that we face in thinking about Eretz Yisrael and thinking about our return to the land of Israel is the fact that who were the ones that, it wasn't only and exclusively, but often the people who built the land of Israel were the secular Zionists, certainly in the early years, in the times when Rav Teichtal was writing. So the main proponents of the state of Israel were not religious. And as we saw last week, one of the most essential components to returning to the land of Israel, to be able to live in Eretz Yisrael, is that we be the Yarshim, we be the spiritual heirs of Avram Avinu, of Abraham, who was fulfilling the Torah. And when we fulfill the Torah, so then we're Zeich, we merit to have that special divine providence, the Hashgacha Pratis, that's only here in Israel. But Lamaisa, when we look at the reality of it, when we look at who's in charge, who's been in charge, and amazingly, as the years have passed, the spiritual element of Yiddishkeit and of the state of Israel has gotten stronger and stronger, to the point where today, more than 50%, the right, the conservatives, which are mainly the religious parties, the Datilumi parties, the Haredi parties, and the traditional parties, those are the ones who are the ones in power in this country. So it's an amazing thing, and there's an amazing renaissance that's going on. And it's also interesting to note that as we come up against the challenges, today the challenges are much different than they were in the early days of the country. 76 years ago, we had challenges, but today it's, we're talking about crazy weapons. But of course, the fact that we have strengthened our Yiddishkeit, the fact that there's so much Torah learning that's going on in the land of Israel. Yes, we know about the discussions about the Haredi draft, etc. I'm not getting into that, but the fact that there's so much Torah, so much Yiddishkeit, so much more tradition within the land of Israel has given us incredible power. That's, that goes without question. But the question that does exist is why indeed, or can it be, how can it be that those who are not religious were so heavily involved in building up the state? So Rav Teichtal addresses this point, and he says, he says, there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin on 108b, and the Gemara teaches us something which really underscores the fact that it can be, first of all, that someone who's not righteous or even wicked, it says, can build the land of Israel, but not just that, he has a tremendous merit. It's considered an awesome spiritual accomplishment, even though he has the wrong intentions. Let's see this together. He says, why was it that Omri was a wicked king of the northern kingdom of the Jewish people? Why did he merit to have Malchus, to have the kingship? And not only that, of course, it was 10 tribes out of the 12 tribes. And not only that, as we'll see, his kids also merited to have it. It's because he built up one city in the land of Israel. Tanan of Elio, the Medrash tells us, it's the Gemara, but it's Tanan of Elio, Elio, a Navi is speaking. He says, one time I was sitting in the base Medrash, Amarti lem Rabbi say, Man ishtana Omri mikol malachim, shelo yeshivu b'nei acharei mat shebo Omri What's the difference between Omri, this wicked king, who had 3 sons, who continued to be kings after him, whereas there were other kings who they didn't merit to have kings come out of them to continue their line? Amrli lo shamanu. So they said in the base medrash, we haven't heard the answer to this question. I said to them, Elijah, the prophet said, it's because he built up the city of Shomron. He added and he built up a huge city in the land of Israel. And interestingly, he didn't have the most l'shem shamayim intentions. He wasn't such a big tzaddik. He was quite wicked. And his intent was, he said in his mind, Kishem Yerushalayim Kula Malchi Yehuda Kachte Shomer LaMalchi Yisrael. He said, look, the kings of Judah, they have their own capital city, which is Jerusalem, which is a center of teaching and a center of worship to Hashem. So we're going to have in the north, in the northern kingdom, a different city called Shomron. That's going to be the center for the kings of the northern kingdom, which is called Malchi Yisrael. I come in Sanhedrin Shom Yalkut Shemaini. So that's what the Gemara says. It's very interesting. Yosef Lagun Rabbi Yosef Engel. He brings from Rabbi Yosef Engel. Yisrael Kabbalah. The sefer is founded on Kabbalistic ideas. It's hard to understand. For building up a city in Jerusalem, not Jerusalem, corresponding to Jerusalem, for building up a city in Israel. So therefore, he gets this reward of kingship, of being a king, and his children being kings. What's the reason? Malchus Avar Maisa Anabale Schar Acher. What is it? Why doesn't he get a different reward? Because of Mekubalim. The Mekubalim, right? The Adua de Eretz Yisrael Havi B'Sfiras Malchus Delamala. We find that the land of Israel, Kabbalistically, corresponds to the upper sphere of Malchus. Malchus means kingship. We could think of it as Israel is the king of the world. The Jewish people are meant to be the kings of the world, the rulers of the world. Israel is the location which is meant to be the kingship of the world, which is why everybody wants it. Right? Whoever has control over Israel, over Jerusalem, they're the spiritual rulers of the world, really. So v'yayin hu tikein b'chinas malchus b'yisafa do'ezivra echad b'eretz Yisrael. Says Rav Yosef Engel, since he added on a city to Jerusalem, he was saying Jerusalem, since he added on a city to the land of Israel, which it means that he added on to the malchus of the world, the aspect of malchus. So that's why he merited himself to be a king. He added on the city in Israel, which is malchus, so he got malchus. After Omri, says, even though Omri was from one of the wicked kings, Mikra Mali Diver Akasuf. Pasuk tells us many times, Vayala Omri, Vayiken Esahar Shomron, Vayiven Esahar, Vayikra Shema Ir, Shabona Shomron, speaks of him establishing the city. Immediately it says that he did evil in the eyes of Hashem. He was worse than anyone before him. He went in the ways of Yeravam ben Avad, who was the ultimate of the evil kings of the northern kingdom. He established the city not for God's sake, but only for his own sake, for his own honor. He wanted this to be the city, the beautiful capital city of the northern kingdom. Even though he was a sinner and he built the city with great sins, he fulfilled the positive commandment of living and dwelling in and developing the land of Israel. And it's a mitzvah every moment. As I read in the Sefer of the Gift of Eretz Yisrael from Rav Kalfa, just planting, just stopping and planting, you're obligated to even stop learning in order to plant something in Eretz Yisrael. I just could go into my backyard, plant some grass. and I'm doing a mitzvah Yishuv Haaretz. Tilav Kain, do like a mitzvah, like a star. Right? If not for the fact that he was doing a positive commandment, he wouldn't have a mitzvah, and he wouldn't have any reward. And specifically, what was the schar? The reward was that he got to be a king. Clearly, he did a rectification in the upper aspect, in the sphera of Malchus up above. So that's why he merited to have himself and 3 generations would be kings over the Jewish people. So even though he did it wrongly, he did it with wickedness, nevertheless, he was able to accomplish this. And the proof is that he received reward. He became the king. You can't deny it. This is very clear. There's no way to refute this kind of proof. Even a person who's wicked and he denies the Torah, heaven forbid, despite his sinning, despite his denial of the entire Torah by being an Ovid Avodah Zarah, serving idolatry, nevertheless, he was able, through the building of that city of Shomron, to accomplish an incredible tikkun. Even in the upper realms. This proves that even in our times, as this is talking 80 years ago, today it's much less, it's much more the religious people who are involved in actually building the land. But in those days, the ones who started off the building were people who were not those who were serving Hashem properly. And they left the Torah. The people today are not worse than Omri. Omri, the Torah tells us he was wicked. He followed in the ways of Yeravam. He was worse than anyone before him. He caused the people to sin. So he says it would seem to be the same in regards to our times, that although it's being done in a way and by people who are not l'shem shamayim, they're not properly doing it for the sake of heaven, and if anything, they're doing it for their own sake, for their own destructive reasons. Nevertheless, as we see from Omri, it does have powerful consequences. It does have powerful tikkunim. It fixes the highest realms. And therefore, we need to understand that although it's easy to see it in a negative light, we also have to look at it in a positive light. And he continues, I'm not reading everything, I'm skipping a little part, but he continues and finishes off this introduction by telling us that the Torah is kind of talking directly to the people who are actually not keeping the Torah. But it's a chizuk for us to hear, because we are. And when we come to Eretz Yisrael, we're helping to build Eretz Yisrael through the Torah, through building Torah, through learning Torah. And he says like this, Ach lu amishame'ali, kimat oiveh machnia. Amar Pasuk. Pasuk says, do you want to know how to overcome your enemies? Right? And this is the question on our minds, of course. We need a good army. We need advanced protective weapons and offensive weapons, etc. But you want to know the spiritual truth to how we can succeed in defeating our enemies. It's the pasuk. It says in Tehillim chapter 81 verses 14 and 15. It says, "Lu ami sheme'ali, if my nation would just listen to me," Hashem says, "Kemat oiveh machnia, their enemies would be almost completely destroyed." Pasuk is saying, "Tazu es ruach ha'amim shevesim imachim." Leave behind. And this was a problem, by the way, also in the times of Ezra and Nehemiah. This was one of the main problems that they dealt with as they built the second Beis Hamikdash. And the Gemara says that when Moshiach comes, it will be a similar type of return as in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. They dealt with this problem of people who were not religious, and there were many men who had married non-Jewish women. It's explicit in the Psukim there. Go look it up. Perhaps we'll see more about it as we study the Sefer. But what's the solution? Leave the spirit of the nations that you brought with you, right? And that's also true of all of us. When we come to Israel, we come with us with our American ideas, our European ideas, our Australian, South African, wherever we're coming from. We have a way of thinking which is more of a Goyish way of thinking. But we need to leave that behind. Make sure you do everything based on the advice of the great sages of the Torah. It should be done in the spirit of the Torah. Our Torah is so rich. With our Torah, we can solve all of the national issues that face us. In the best way possible in all times. Such that the land of Israel will continue to flourish in every single way, in the best measure possible. There won't be any stopping, we won't have any issues nationally when everything is done in the spirit of the Torah. The Medrash in Shir Hashirim says, on the pasuk of B'nai Yerushalayim, the daughters of Jerusalem, Rabbanan Amru, Al Tikre B'nai Elav B'nai Yerushalayim. Don't read the verse, the daughters of Jerusalem, but rather read it, those who build Jerusalem. B'nai, daughters, B'nai, builders. Zu Sanhedrin Gedayla, Sheyeshvin Mevina Noisan, B'chol She'elo Mishpat. This is a reference to the great Sanhedrin, the great sages who stood on the Har Bayis. You can see right behind me, that was the exact place where they stood. And they judged the people, they guided them in their interpersonal affairs. They're the ones, the Torah sages, the great ones of Torah, they're the ones who have all the answers to all the questions of life. The court has a special power. They have a special siyata d'shmaya to do things correctly, to give the correct direction, to help the Jewish people and whatever they say and whatever they do, it has a kiyum, it lasts. So we see that the great sages of the Torah have all of this ability. Now that's what I want to read from the Rebbeinu Smecha. I want to just read one small section from the gift of Eretz Yisrael, which is very much, it's a little story about Rav Shraga Feivel Mendlowitz, one of the great Torah sages of the land of America, not the land of Israel. But he had an incredible love for Eretz Yisrael, and he spoke extensively about the importance of living in Eretz Yisrael. And he had students who came here. This is talking about in the early days of the establishment of Israel. And he says like this is on page 156. While Rav Shraga Feivel Mendlowitz's staunch support for the newly created Jewish state was widely known, he was perfectly well aware of who its founders and leaders were. Rav Yeshua Schiff recalled Rav Shraga Feivel saying that the fact that Eretz Yisrael was controlled by non-religious and anti-religious Jews was no reason to abstain from acknowledging Hashem's kindness in opening the gates of Eretz Yisrael once again on behalf of Jews everywhere, right? He was talking about right immediately after World War II, and there were Jewish survivors in DP camps. Rav Shraga Feivel would often say that although the leaders of the state were not religious, at least there was now one country in the world that would not refuse entry to the thousands of Holocaust survivors languishing in displaced persons camps throughout Germany and Austria. He would say that a mere 3 years after having survived the greatest Jewish tragedy in history, it was hard not to hope that the Jewish state would offer survivors a chance to begin their lives anew, which was indeed true. It's exactly what happened. And look at the transformation, as we spoke about earlier, the transformation, how the country has become more and more religious. Well, listen to this last point. Rav Shraga Feivel often speculated as to why divine providence had orchestrated for secular Zionists to play such an important role in the history of the Jewish nation. Why is it being built by them? Why is it being built by people who are not religious? And he said an amazing thing. Every Jew has a pintele yid, a spark of holiness inherited from our forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, deep inside him, that no matter how far a Jew drifts, the spark is always there. Perhaps, said Rav Shraga Feivel, Hashem wanted the secular Zionists to play a major role in building the new state so that they would maintain their connection with the Jewish people and not be swallowed up among the nations of the world. And if we look at history, we see how prescient his words were. Because look at the Jewish community in the United States. Of course, we have the Torah community, which is very strong, but 6 million Jews were lost in the spiritual abyss of assimilation in the States. While those who are living in Israel, there was hope for them, there was an opportunity for them. They remained Jewish, they remained connected. And ultimately, so the Baal Tshuva movement is going strong, and it gets stronger, and there's Hidabrut is a channel speaking to Baalei Tshuva. It's on TV, and it inspires people to come back. But that potential was there because they were part of the founding of the state. So these are such important ideas. We need to take them to heart, try to understand it, and recognize that Eretz Yisrael, this is where we belong. Thank you so much for listening. See you again next time.